The atmosphere in Kuala Lumpur is carefully composed, polished floors reflecting machine-bright lighting, flags arranged in measured symmetry, camera crews stationed behind roped partitions. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit has gathered dozens of leaders, staff delegations, security details, and media from across the region. But the mood surrounding the Canadian delegation is particularly intense. The question circulating among journalists, trade analysts, and political observers is whether Canada and the United States are about to reopen the trade relationship that, in recent weeks, has become heavily strained. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney enters the venue with a calm, composed posture. The cameras follow him as he walks the corridor toward the press briefing room. His arrival here comes after a period of sudden diplomatic freeze. The United States, led by President Donald Trump, announced an additional 10% increase in tariffs on Canadian imports, escalating what had already been a difficult trade environment. This increase was justified by the White House in response to what President Trump described as a hostile act linked to an advertisement campaign that, from Washington's perspective, crossed a line. The moment has added tension to an already complex relationship between two of the closest trade partners in the world. For decades, the United States and Canada have maintained open cross-border trade, economic interdependence, supply chain integration, and cultural alignment. Now, that stability is being tested in a way not seen since the major trade disputes of past eras. As Carney approaches the microphone, there is no dramatization in his expression, no attempt to raise the emotional pitch. Instead, he speaks in clear, measured English, framed by the maple leaf flags arranged behind him. He chooses his words with deliberation. We are ready to sit down at the negotiating table with the United States, myself with the President and my colleagues with their counterparts, when the United States is ready to sit down, he says. There is no accusation in his tone. There is no signal of frustration. Instead, this is a message of patience and preparedness. The Canadian government has been under pressure from business owners, exporters, agricultural associations, and manufacturing leaders, many of whom rely deeply on American markets. A prolonged trade freeze would mean disruptions in logistics, layoffs, lost revenue streams, and increased cost burdens for families and firms on both sides of the border. Canada's message, therefore, is carefully structured. Emphasize openness, emphasize willingness, avoid escalation. Carney repeats his message again during the press availability. From the perspective of the federal government, for which I am responsible, we are ready to resume these discussions when the United States wishes to resume them. The repetition is not accidental. In trade diplomacy, repetition is a strategic tool. It signals endurance, it signals stability, and most importantly, it signals that Canada does not intend to appear reactive or impulsive. As he continues, Carney also makes a diplomatic gesture that extends beyond the immediate Canada-US context. As I always would be, as you would expect, as it's the President of the United States, I will, of course, make myself available to other world leaders if they wish. We will both be at APEC. Canada is a member of APEC. The line subtly shifts the conversation from bilateral grievance to multilateral presence. The implication is that Canada will not isolate itself in this moment, nor will it act as though its global position is determined solely by the stance of Washington. The Canadian delegation is continuing with its full APEC schedule, attending working sessions, bilateral meetings, and strategic dialogues on trade, digital transformation, energy transition, and infrastructure development. The summit is not being overshadowed by the dispute. Rather, the dispute is being positioned as one point among many in an evolving international framework. The United States, on the other hand, enters APEC with a different posture. President Trump has chosen to link trade negotiations to political gestures and public messaging strategies. The reference to the Canadian advertisement and the characterization of it as a hostile act underscores how quickly diplomatic dynamics can shift when symbolic gestures become interpreted through strategic lenses. For the Trump administration, the tariffs are presented as leverage not only in trade but in political image. Yet the tariffs have consequences. For many American businesses, particularly in manufacturing, auto supply, agriculture, and retail, Canadian goods are a structural part of their supply chains. Increasing tariffs raises their costs, which may then be passed to consumers. The longer the freeze lasts, the greater the pressure within the American market itself for a negotiated solution. Mark Carney's tone suggests awareness of this dynamic. Canada's message is not confrontational because confrontation is not the most effective strategy when one is waiting for the other party to recognise the economic effects of their own policy choices. Instead, Canada positions itself as stable, reliable and consistent. In the hall outside the press room, advisers and aides move in organised lines. Security personnel maintain watch. Journalists discuss whether a one-on-one meeting between Carney and Trump could occur on the sidelines of APEC. The Canadian Prime Minister's language hints at openness, but avoids suggesting pursuit. We are ready to have discussions when the Americans wish to have those discussions, but we're not. Obviously, we don't dictate the timing of that. This final message is critical. Canada is signalling patience without weakness, flexibility without desperation. It is emphasising that negotiations cannot be forced, but neither will they be avoided. Meanwhile, in policy circles and economic institutions, the discourse centres on whether this moment marks a deeper shift in US trade philosophy. The Trump administration has often linked trade policies to national identity and strategic political image, unlike prior eras where trade negotiations were largely insulated from campaign rhetoric. In this world, diplomatic actions are not merely diplomatic. They are performative, symbolic, and designed for public interpretation as much as economic outcome. Canada, however, is choosing to respond not symbolically, but structurally. The Canadian government continues to engage in active trade diversification initiatives, increasing bilateral engagement with Indo-Pacific partners, expanding research and clean energy investment networks, and positioning itself within broader global supply chain restructuring. This diversification strategy does not replace the value of the US relationship, but it ensures that Canada is not left without leverage. Inside the APEC venue, the Canadian flags displayed near the press corridor tell their own visual story, carefully placed, illuminated, presented without the slightest indication of tension. The imagery is designed to convey continuity, stability, national presence. As the summit continues, the probability of dialogue remains open. Trump and Carney will be in the same venue, attending many of the same sessions, walking similar corridors, passing under the same chandeliers and banners. International diplomatic summits often allow for unplanned, unofficial exchanges, brief hallway conversations that can reset entire negotiation trajectories. A handshake by a coffee station, a side conversation between advisors, a message passed by an envoy. These moments sometimes unlock what formal settings cannot. The world watching understands this. Diplomacy is not always keynote speeches and official communiques. It is often quiet, paced movement, timing, patience, and patience appears to be Canada's current strategy. No provocation, no escalation, no retaliatory tariff announcements. Instead, calm positioning, the readiness to speak, the readiness to resume, but only when both sides are prepared. The visuals of the flags, shown in wide, medium, and close-up shots, reinforce the national identity that frames this moment. Canada is present, Canada is prepared. Canada does not step away from the global table. As the APEC summit proceeds, the question remains whether the United States will choose resolution or continued pressure. The diplomatic choreography now moves quietly, step by step, moment by moment. But if there is one consistent message from the Canadian side, it is this: Canada does not walk away from the table. Canada waits at the table. And when the United States is ready to sit down, the chair across from Mark Carney will not be empty.